Hi folks, I am busy working on the next video, and the research for it is sure taking its sweet time. So I figured I'd chuck out a quick video just to keep you all entertained. If you don't follow me on Twitter, you wouldn't know that I decided to do Dry January in 2023, which is basically not having any alcohol for a month. Now, the last time I did this was for Sober October, a couple of years ago, video in the old description for that video, and non-alcoholic beer has actually come a long way since that first video. I tried a lot of them, and I figured I'd rank all the ones that I tried this January into a tier list, like, you know, all the cool kids. So behold, my tiers. I'm not doing the usual F to S tier like everyone else. I'm grading these beers on what I personally felt and thought about them, because beer is very subjective, and one man's F tier is another man's S tier, and I've met plenty of people that don't agree with my take on certain beers and vice versa. And with that said, here's the tiers that I've come up with. So at the top we start off with wow, that's good. Now these are the ones that really made me go ooh, and you really can't discern that these are non-alcoholic. These are cream of the crop, real good stuff. So yeah, this is the tier for that, the stuff that really makes you sit up and take notice. Next up is pleasantly surprising. Now these are not quite the sort of thing that make you sit up and go ooh, but these are the kind of beer that you can tell they don't have alcohol in, but they are really good. So you can still have a good session on these, although you know that there's something just a little bit missing, and it's usually the alcohol. Next up is One and Done. Yep, that's pretty self-explanatory. They're not terrible beers, but I'd only have one of them because they're not really my thing. After this comes the meh tier for the decidedly totally average. You know, you just taste them like, eh. And then finally, for the most egregious offenders, I have got the get in the bin tier. And these are the ones that I didn't like at all. They were just, no, I barely finished them. They were just awful. So they need to get in the bin. So that is all my tiers. And with that all said, let's dive into all these beers and see what I thought of them. So the first on my list is Peroni 0%. And I wasn't expecting great things about this beer, and I didn't get much. Peroni, like some of its peers, like Heineken Zero, it looked the part, but it didn't taste the part. You could tell that they'd put something in there, and instead of alcohol, they'd put something kind of sweet in there. So it wasn't really that special. So into the meh tier goes Peroni Zero. Next entry on the list is Doom Bar Zero, and Doom Bar Zero can definitely get in the bin. I did not like this at all. Now, disclaimer, I'm not a big fan of Doom Bar anyway, but this took it to a new level. It basically just tasted like malt, and if I wanted malt, I'd just go and buy Horlicks or something like that. It just did not taste anything beery at all. It just tasted like a malt drink. So get in the bin, Doom Bar Zero. Terribly sorry. But, yeah, get in the bin. Third on the list is Birra Moretti Zero. And this beer is the entire reason that I created the pleasantly surprising tier for this tier list, because I was pleasantly surprised that it almost tasted a bit like a lager. In fact, something I've realised is that lagers are one of those styles where if you do take the alcohol out, it is very difficult to tell that you've done so. And these guys have done a really good job taking the alcohol out and still making it taste a bit like a lager. So, well done you guys, I was pleasantly surprised. Next up is Lidl's take on the old alcohol-free, the Perlenbacher 0.0%. And it's a bit meh, lads. Yeah, it's, again, like the Peroni. It suffers from, you can tell they've put some like sweetener or some sweetening agent in there to make it, to fill in the gap that alcohol left. It looks like a lager, you know, it pours like a lager, but it just doesn't taste like a lager because you can just take one sip and it's like, that's really sweet. While I'm here, in this meh tier, we're going to pop Rheinbacher Pilsner 0 in this tier as well, for exactly the same reasons that I've just said with the Perlenbacher. Again, really sweet. You can tell they've replaced the alcohol with something else. This was Aldi's take on non-alcohol lager, I believe. And yeah, exactly the same reason. So both of those go in the meh tier, because honestly, they're just a bit meh. However, the next beer on my list really impressed me, and that was Lucky Saint. It was very lemony, it was a bit zesty, there was a hint of bitterness, reminded me a bit of Camden Hills, and it actually tasted like a lager. And this was one of the two beers that made me invent the wow tier on this thing, because it was that good. This was one of the two beers that I kept going back to, because it was so good, and you could not tell that there was nothing in it. So, yeah, well done, Lucky Saint. Moving swiftly on to the next ones. Next up was another surprise in Brooklyn Special Effects Alcohol Free. Although it wasn't really the surprise I was looking for. You see, I expected it was going to be a lager, and when I poured it out, well, you can see what colour it is on screen. It was completely different. So maybe the different style of lager than I was expecting. Either way, it tasted okay. It wasn't terrible. But this has to go into a one and done, because it wasn't quite a flavour that I really wanted to drink more of. So the next two beers are by Big Drop, and I believe they specialise in non-alcoholic and low-alcoholic stuff. Please mention in the comments if that is correct or not. That's the vibe I get from them. But this first beer by these guys is the second beer that made me go, wow, that is really good. And that was the Big Drop Galactic Milk Stout. It was roasty, you got that touch of sweetness in there. It tasted like a milk stout, and I think that's the thing. I mentioned earlier that lagers seem to be really good at non-alcoholic, stouts as well, and I think it's because of that roastiness and the general feel of stouts. They tend to be quite thick anyway, so it feels like you're drinking something boozy even though you're not. But yeah, really impressed with Big Drop Galactic Stout, really impressed, so up into the top tier you go. Next, of course, was another Big Drop beer, and that was the Pine Trail that they do. And yeah, it tastes piney, slightly bitter, slight dry finish on the end, bit of citrus in there. Pleasantly surprising is where I'm sticking this one. It wasn't one that I was just like, oh, I could drink tons of this. But it was really good, and I did have a couple of cans of this over the period, but it just fell shy of that top tier. Next up is a beer by Brulo, and it's called Lust for Life. Now this one, on my notes, I've got fruity, hints of coconut and chocolate. Take that as you will. And I've also put that it tastes like it should have some booze in it. And that sticks it right in the wow tier. Because yes, this thing really does taste like it should be alcoholic, but it isn't. They've done a real good job at sort of like mimicking the alcohol zing that you can get. Next up is Northern Monk's Holy Faith, which was a hazy pale ale, and yeah, it did exactly what it said on the tin. It was hazy, it was pale, it was an ale, it had got all the usual sort of things that you associate with pale ale. Just wasn't really my thing, wasn't a sessionable one for me, so I put that in my one and done. Others may actually really like this though. It is actually really good. For others, this might be sort of way up in the wow tier, but for me, it's just like, this tastes like a lot of stuff I've had before. Sticking on the theme of pale ales, we now go to Shipyard Low Tide. And, yeah, this was a bit meh for me. It tasted like Shipyard, don't get me wrong, but non-alcoholics can sometimes fall into this field of, you can tell there's something missing, and you can tell that there's something missing from Shipyard Low Tide. It's just one of those things. So it gets a meh from me. You might like it, so if you like Shipyard, give it a whirl, but certainly didn't register on my radar that much. So next up, we have something a bit special, and it is Guinness's offering. Guinness 0%. It was chocolatey, it was roasty, and the nitro element of this really sells it, and it really feels like a beer. It feels like a beer. In fact, I'm going to put some footage up now of me pouring some 0%, and you can see, just look, it pours like normal Guinness, and it even settles like normal Guinness. Everything about it is to try and convince you that it's normal Guinness. Now, Remember what I said about the Big Drop, how the stouts, they don't tend to be too boozy? It's the same with this. So it really tasted like I was just drinking a normal Guinness. It was phenomenal. It's been well received in the beer community, and rightly so, because if you'd have given me this, I would not know it was not alcoholic. So straight up into the wow tier you go. Guinness, well done chaps, well done. Something that doesn't quite fare as well though is the next entry, which is Speckled Hen Low Alcohol. Yeah, it tastes a bit like Speckled Hen. It's, you know, you can see where they're going with it, but just something about it just ain't right. So unfortunately, this is the second entry to be put in the bin. So get in the bin, Speckled Hen. Now, obviously, again, there's a bit more bias because just like with Doombar, this isn't my vibe. I'm not really keen on Speckled Hen, but I have to give credit where credit's due. Unlike Doombar, these guys at least tried to make it taste like Speckled Hen. Doombar just tasted like malt. But still, it's a no from me. So unfortunately, you have to get in the bin. Next up, a brew from one of the craft beer darlings, really, and that is Thornbridge. You know, everyone loves a bit of Thornbridge Jaipur, so I was quite excited to try their low alcohol version of a beer, and their version is called 05. My notes say that there's a big hit of citrus, some bitterness, a nice flavour, but it was let down by being a bit thin on the palate. And there's a hint of orange in there as well, apparently, according to my notes. And with that, I'm going to put this in the pleasantly surprising. So, still really good. Still really good. Most of Thornbridge's stuff is. If you haven't tried it, give it a whirl. But yeah, 05, pleasantly surprised with. While we're on the subject of popular UK beers, let's go for Ghost Ship 0.5. Ghost Ship, of course, being one of the first ever beers to use the American Citra hop in its production. So let's see what the 0.5 version tastes like. Well, it's citrusy, naturally. Tastes a lot like the normal Ghost Ship, but it is a bit thin, and that's probably because of the lack of alcohol. It's not giving it that body. There's a bit of a lingering bitterness as well, but other than that, this beer is pleasantly surprising. So if you're a fan of Ghost Ship, give this a whirl, because you might be pleasantly surprised yourself. So, from the well-received to the controversial, as we now move on to, the Scottish brewery, as it's been nicknamed in certain circles, we're going to do Brewdog's Punk IPA alcohol free. Now, my notes on this were as follows, that it tasted very much like a Punk IPA, so still tropically, still grapefruity, but you can really tell that it's the 0% version. There seems to be something missing, a certain 5% of something, if you know what I mean. Yeah, it's still going in the pleasantly surprising category because it did really taste like Punk IPA, but you can really also tell that it's not got any booze in, so yeah, I don't know. Okay, we're on to the last three beers. Two of them are by Big Drop and another is by someone completely different. So let's start off with the Big Drop ones. First off, we have Big Drop Paradiso Citra IPA. My notes say, this has definitely got Citra in. Had a dry finish. Yeah, it's pretty good. But for me, it was a one and done. It was just, there was nothing that made me want to drink more of it, if you know what I mean. It was just a bit averagey, if you know what I mean. It's just, it's an IPA. And unfortunately, in this world that we live in, they're everywhere. So it didn't really stand out. So one and done for me on that one. Next up is Big Drop Poolside. Another one of the Big Drop brews. This one bitter. It was piney. Quite dry finish. Again, a one and done. It was much like its predecessor, the Paradiso. It did what most IPAs and like American Pales do. And it's nice, but like I wouldn't want to drink this all the time. So, one and done for you. And finally, the last beer that I tried in this January period was Clausthaler. And this was very malty and very bitter. I did actually enjoy this one. I really did. It was a nice change throughout all the pales and IPAs that I tried. But I still do have to stick this in a one and done because it wasn't the kind of flavour where I could sit down and just go, I could have 17 of these. It was malty, it was bitter, it was nice, It's good to break up the sort of monotony, but it was not kind of what I was after, if you know what I mean. And with that, that is the tier list done. These are all the beers that I tried over the January period. There we go. I'm going to leave it on screen for a couple of minutes. What do you think of my choices? What do you think I should try in future? Please leave me a comment down below and let me know what you think of any of these beers. Are you a massive fan of the Aldi and Lidl versions of their lager? Are you a big fan? Because certainly colleagues of mine said that they were, and they really enjoyed them. Me, not so much, because beer is subjective. So let's talk about it in the comments below. Why not? Hey, so if you're interested in either theology or beer, please do wallop the old subscribe button. And until next time, grab yourself a drink and keep asking questions, alcoholic or not.